Julian Croft's voice echoed off the polished glass panels of the executive conference room like a cheap speaker at a regional sales conference. He stood at the head of the mahogany table in a tailored charcoal suit, his arms spread wide as though expecting a standing ovation from the assembled board of directors. "We are entering a brand new era of bold, modern leadership," Julian announced, gesturing toward a sleek slide deck projected onto the wall. "An era defined by rapid expansion, charismatic vision, and aggressive market capture." The only response was the subtle squeak of Derek Vance's leather chair near the back wall. 54 years old, gray at the temples, and wearing the same comfortable dark blazer he had worn for a decade, Derek sat in the shadows of the room he had helped build. For 15 long years, Derek had served as the chief systems architect and initial co-founder of OmniKinetics. Every line of back-end code, every automated event pipeline, and every fault-tolerant server architecture that held the enterprise together had been written by Derek during 70-hour workweeks, surviving on lukewarm black coffee and takeout Chinese food. Yet here was Julian, 42 years old, full of polished teeth and meaningless corporate jargon, presenting Derek's core data routing framework as if it had descended upon him during a weekend retreat in Aspen. Over the past 6 months, Julian had quietly restructured the executive chart. First came the title shift, moving Derek from Chief Technology Officer to Director of Enterprise Archival Systems. In practice, that meant relocating Derek's workstation from the top floor to a windowless basement office next to the clattering primary server rack and a broken three-dimensional printer. Derek's once-packed digital calendar, which used to resemble an impossible puzzle of system deployments and client integrations, had been systematically cleared. He was left with vague monthly all-hands invitations and mandatory wellness seminars led by outside consultants. Everyone in the building understood the maneuver. It was not merely a demotion. It was a slow, deliberate squeeze designed to make a veteran engineer feel irrelevant until he quietly resigned without claiming his vested equity. One missed executive briefing at a time. One deleted channel thread. One uncomfortable silence whenever board members inquired about long-term technical stability. Julian would smile warmly, pat Derek on the shoulder, and declare that Derek was simply enjoying a well-deserved strategic advisory phase. Derek did not throw tantrums. He did not raise his voice in management meetings. Instead, he maintained a steady, polite composure. He took meticulous notes. He logged time-stamped records of every permission change in the internal administrative portals. He printed updated company handbooks whenever HR added new clauses regarding external asset definitions. When Julian began removing Derek's name from historical press releases and describing himself as the sole founding visionary on social media, Derek quietly archived every page. The turning point arrived on a foggy Thursday afternoon in mid-October. Rain streaked across the glass of the main lobby as Derek walked past a cluster of newly hired business analysts. A young associate wearing an unbuttoned vest and no socks looked up from his tablet, squinting at Derek's plain ID badge. "Excuse me," the young analyst called out patronizingly. "Are you the afternoon facility contractor? The espresso machine on the 3rd floor is making a grinding noise." Derek stopped, looked at the young man, and let out a soft, dry chuckle. "No, son," Derek replied gently. "I am not the facility contractor." He continued down the corridor toward his basement office. As he passed the open door of the secondary conference room, he heard Julian speaking with the newly appointed vice president of operations. "We are sunsetting the legacy administrative frameworks," Julian was telling the vice president, his voice carrying clearly across the quiet room. "We are moving entirely past the Derek Vance era. It is time for version 2.0. The old architecture is too rigid, too conservative. We need fluid, high-velocity infrastructure that looks good in investor presentations. Version 2.0. The words rested like gravel in Derek's jaw. He walked down the concrete stairs to his basement desk, sat down before his dual monitors, and stared at the terminal prompt. Inside his chest there was no panic, no rage, only a profound crystalline clarity. This enterprise no longer belonged to the craft of engineering. It had been surrendered to performance art. That evening, as the last board members filed out of the building following an extended quarterly audit, Julian intercepted Derek near the lobby exit. Julian held a leather portfolio under one arm, his smile sharp and triumphant. He stepped into Derek's path, leaning in close so his voice would not carry to the security desk. "You should really think about turning in your keys by the end of the month, Derek," Julian said quietly, his tone laced with condescending pity. "You will regret leaving if you try to fight this. This company is me. Every investor knows my face. Every client buys my pitch. Without me, you are just an old programmer sitting in a dark room." Derek looked at Julian for 3 long seconds. He observed the tight knot of Julian's silk tie, the superficial confidence in his eyes, and the absolute absence of technical understanding behind his words. Derek did not slam his briefcase or utter a bitter retort. "I understand your position, Julian," Derek said softly. He turned, walked down to his basement desk, and unplugged his laptop dock. He placed his 2 small potted succulents into a canvas tote bag, along with his personal notebook and a single mechanical keyboard. Sitting at his monitor, he composed a simple 50-word email addressed to Human Resources and the board. "Effective immediately, I hereby resign from my position as Director of Enterprise Archival Systems at OmniKinetics. Thank you for the 15 years of professional opportunity. Sincerely, Derek Vance." He clicked send. He dropped his brass physical keycard onto the center of the desk, swung his tote bag over his shoulder, and walked out the side exit into the cool October rain without looking back once. Derek drove his sedan through the heavy evening rain, pulling into the rear parking lot of a quiet roadside diner 6 miles from the corporate park. This was the exact diner where he and Julian had sat 6 years ago, eating greasy omelets and celebrating their very first enterprise contract with an international freight carrier. Back then, Julian had been desperate for Derek's software engine, promising equal partnership, shared governance, and eternal respect for the underlying intellectual property. Inside the quiet sedan, the air smelled of damp wool and old leather. Derek opened his personal laptop, connected to his mobile hotspot, and opened a browser window. He was not seeking wild revenge. He was seeking an accurate, dispassionate accounting of enterprise reality. He began by opening a terminal window to check the registry status of OmniKinetics.com's. 2 years prior, Julian had insisted on handing off all domain management, public marketing assets, and web hosting to his 28-year-old nephew, Gavin Croft, who ran a boutique digital marketing firm out of a rented warehouse. Gavin had charged OmniKinetics $40,000 annually for what he described as high-level DNS maintenance and cloud optimization. Derek typed a simple lookup query into the terminal. He blinked, adjusted his reading glasses, and refreshed the query. The primary domain registration for OmniKinetics.com had expired 48 hours ago on Tuesday midnight, because Gavin had attempted to migrate the corporate web pages to a cheap third-party virtual private server to save on hosting overhead. He had forgotten to enable automatic renewal on the registrar account. The domain had completed its standard grace period and had dropped cleanly into the open public registrar queue. It was sitting there, completely unowned, visible to anyone with an internet connection. Derek stared at the screen. The entire digital footprint of OmniKinetics, their secure client login portals, their automated API endpoints, their electronic billing webhooks, and their executive email routing, was tied directly to that single domain string. The cost to purchase the available domain from the registrar was exactly $12. Derek hovered his cursor over the checkout button. He remembered Julian's words from 2 hours ago. "This company is me." Derek clicked the mouse. The transaction processed instantly. $12 was deducted from Derek's personal debit card, along with an optional $38 for privacy escrow registration. Order confirmed. Domain ownership transferred cleanly to Derek Vance. He sat back against the headrest. The dashboard lights cast a soft blue glow across his hands. He did not laugh. He simply breathed out a long, measured exhale of relief. Next, Derek opened the official state business portal for the Secretary of State. He navigated to the corporate registration section and filled out the online articles of organization for a brand new legal entity, Vance Core Systems, LLC. When prompted for the primary business purpose, Derek typed, "Enterprise Digital Infrastructure Management, Legacy Software Continuity, and Data Pipeline Architecture." For the principal place of business, he entered his home address. The state filing fee was exactly $139. He authorized the payment, received his state tax identification number via immediate electronic document delivery, and downloaded his stamped certificate of formation. He opened his personal email and sent a text message to Nate Miller, a veteran freelance front-end developer who had worked with Derek on contract projects for over a decade. "Nate," Derek typed, "I need a clean, bare-bones HTML redirect landing page deployed to an active domain tonight. No graphics, no logos, no marketing fluff, just crisp typography and a secure contact form. Are you available?" Nate replied within 45 seconds. "For you, Derek, always. Send the text specifications." Derek drafted the exact copy for the landing page. "For continuity of technical architecture, enterprise data services, and administrative communications, please contact Derek Vance at Vance Core Systems LLC." Below the statement, Nate added a single highly visible button labeled Submit Inquiry, which routed directly to Derek's newly established business email account. By 2 o'clock in the morning, Derek was sitting at his kitchen table in his quiet suburban home. The storm outside had passed, leaving a stillness over the neighborhood. On his screen, the DNS records for OmniKinetics.com had fully propagated across global internet service providers. Anyone in North America, Europe, or Asia who typed the corporate address into their web browser was no longer greeted by Julian's flashy marketing videos or corporate pitch decks. Instead, they saw a pristine white screen with black text and Derek Vance's contact portal. Derek established an independent enterprise bank account under Vance Core Systems LLC, connected a new merchant payment processing portal, and secured a dedicated cloud server environment. He meticulously documented every single step in his personal engineering logbook, recording timestamps, receipt numbers, and network IP routing confirmations. He did not touch any confidential customer databases. He did not copy proprietary client lists. He did not alter any internal files belonging to OmniKinetics. He simply stood at the digital front gate that Julian's organization had abandoned, holding the key he had acquired in an open, lawful transaction. At 2:45 in the morning, Derek closed his laptop, walked into his kitchen, and poured himself 2 fingers of rye whiskey. He held the glass up to the quiet room, took a slow sip, and set it down on the counter. The empire had not been destroyed by force. It had been left unlocked in the driveway, and Derek had merely picked up the keys from the gutter. Monday morning arrived with crisp autumn sunshine streaming through the glass floor-to-ceiling windows of the OmniKinetics bullpen. At 8 o'clock, the office usually buzzed with the gentle sound of coffee machines, ambient jazz playlists, and sales representative reviewing their weekly cold call schedules. By 8:15, however, the atmosphere inside the building felt like an engine room experiencing a sudden loss of oil pressure. It began in the accounting department. Brenda, a senior billing manager who had worked at the company for 4 years, attempted to send out the third quarter invoicing batch to 22 major enterprise clients. She hit the dispatch button on her billing software, leaned back to take a sip of her tea, and froze. Her inbox instantly exploded with 22 system bounce-back notifications. Delivery status notification, failure, recipient domain name invalid or unreachable. Brenda frowned, adjusted her glasses, and retyped the email address of their largest logistics customer in Chicago. She clicked send again. The exact same error flashed across her monitor. "That is odd," Brenda muttered, standing up from her cubicle and looking over the divider. "Is anyone else having trouble with outgoing mail?" Across the room, Brandon, a junior sales representative who boasted about closing deals on golf courses, was in the middle of a live video presentation with a prospective client in Dallas. He was attempting to demonstrate the automated inventory tracking portal. "And as you can see right here on our primary dashboard," Brandon declared confidently, clicking the bookmarked link in his presentation slide. The web browser spun for 4 seconds, then displayed a stark white screen with bold red text. Error 404. Server not found. Brandon cleared his throat, feeling a prickle of heat rise up his neck. "Just a minor local caching hiccup, folks. Let me refresh the staging environment." He clicked refresh 3 times. The browser returned the exact same error. By 8:45, half the floor was standing around the central IT help desk. The customer support lines were ringing off the hook. Enterprise clients from across the country were calling in, demanding to know why their API integrations were failing, why their automated shipping manifests had stalled, and why the corporate website was displaying a blank screen. At 9 o'clock sharp, Julian Croft stepped out of the executive elevator. He wore a brand new Italian wool suit, held an expensive leather briefcase, and carried an energetic expression meant to signal inspiring leadership for the new week. "Good morning, team," Julian called out, clapping his hands together. "Let us make this week a record breaker for third-quarter growth." No one clapped. No one smiled. 30 pairs of eyes turned toward him in complete, deadened silence. Julian stopped in his tracks, his smile stiffening. "What is going on here? Why is everyone standing around?" The lead specialist, a pale young man named Kevin, who had been hired 2 months prior to replace one of Derek's former senior engineers, walked forward, holding a printout of network diagnostics. "Julian," Kevin said, his voice cracking slightly, "our corporate domain is down. Everything, mails, client portals, staging environments, external webhooks, is completely offline." Julian sneered, waving his hand dismissively. "Then reboot the local gateway router, Kevin. Why are you telling me about a routine network glitch?" "It is not a router glitch, Julian," Kevin replied, handing him the paper. "The domain omnikinetics.com is no longer pointing to our cloud infrastructure. In fact, it is no longer registered to us." Julian's jaw tightened. "What do you mean it is not registered to us?" "Gavin handles our domain registration. He charges us $40,000 a year for digital hosting." "I called Gavin 10 minutes ago," Kevin whispered. "He checked his registrar account. Apparently, the auto-renewal credit card on file expired last month. The domain lapsed on Tuesday. It was released to the public market on Thursday night." Julian felt a cold drop of sweat trace a path down his spine beneath his crisp cotton shirt. "Then buy it back right now. Pay whatever penalty fee they want." "We cannot buy it back," Kevin said quietly. "Someone else bought it 48 hours ago." "Who?" Julian barked, his voice rising to a sharp treble that echoed into the open hallway. "Who bought our domain?" Kevin swallowed hard and pulled up a browser window on a nearby laptop. He pointed to the monitor. Julian pushed past 3 junior analysts and stared at the screen. The page was immaculate white. In the center sat 2 neat lines of dark, elegant text: "For enterprise continuity, core data services, and technical communications, please contact Derek Vance at Vance Core Systems LLC." Below it sat a single, operational contact button. Julian stared at the name Derek Vance, as though it were written in fire across his retina. He blinked once, twice, his face flushing from pale white to a deep, blotchy crimson. "Get Gavin on the phone!" Julian roared, slamming his leather briefcase down onto an open desk so hard that a ceramic coffee mug rattled. "Get our legal counsel into my office this instant." By 11 o'clock that morning, the redirect page had logged over 180 unique visitors. Nearly 60 of those hits came from senior procurement directors at Fortune 500 logistics firms who had relied on Derek's software for half a decade. Julian sat in his glass office, screaming into his telephone handset at his nephew Gavin, who was stammering excuses about billing notifications being filtered into his spam folder. Julian hung up the receiver with a violent crash, turned toward his window, and looked out over the parking lot. He had believed that removing Derek Vance would solidify his absolute control over the company. He had believed that engineering was an invisible, disposable commodity that could be replaced by slick presentations and aggressive marketing. Now, he was standing in the center of a silent, paralyzed building, while every single client, investor, and partner who attempted to reach Omnikinetics was greeted by the quiet, unyielding name of the man he had banished to the basement. By Tuesday morning, the storm inside Omnikinetics had escalated from an operational crisis to a legal battleground. Rain lashed against the executive suite windows as Julian paced back and forth across his Persian rug, gesturing wildly at Rachel Adams, the company's senior outside legal counsel. Rachel sat calmly on the leather sofa, a thick yellow notepad resting on her knees, her pen poised with professional detachment. She was an experienced corporate attorney who had spent 25 years navigating enterprise litigation, and she had very little patience for executive panic. "It is criminal conversion," Julian shouted, his neck veins bulging above his collar. It is corporate espionage. He stole our digital front door, Rachel. I want a cease and desist letter drafted, served, and filed in federal court by 3 o'clock today. We will sue him for $20 million in tortious interference. Rachel raised one hand slowly, cutting Julian off mid-sentence. Julian, take a breath and listen to me very carefully. Listen to what? Julian demanded. Under the Federal Anti-Cyber-Squatting Consumer Protection Act, codified under Title 15 of the United States Code, Section 1125, a claim of cyber-squatting requires proof of bad faith intent to profit from a registered trademark. Rachel explained in a cool, measured cadence. Derek Vance did not breach your internal servers. He did not use corporate credit cards. He purchased an expired public domain that your designated agent allowed to lapse through gross administrative negligence. It has our company name on it, Julian yelled, which was never registered as a standalone federal trademark. Rachel noted dryly, checking her notes. Furthermore, Derek's landing page contains 0 trademarked logos, 0 confidential client materials, and 0 deceptive claims. He explicitly states his own legal entity name, Vance Core Systems LLC, and offers continuity services. Legally speaking, he bought abandoned property on an open market. I do not care, Julian snapped. Send the cease and desist anyway. Threaten him with everything in the statute books. Make him think he will be ruined if he does not transfer the domain back by sunset. Rachel sighed softly, shook her head, and wrote down 2 lines on her pad. I will draft a formal demand letter, but I am telling you as your counsel, if Derek Vance has retained competent corporate representation, this letter will not intimidate him. At 2 o'clock that afternoon, Derek sat in the quiet conference room of his attorney, Victoria Scott. Victoria was a formidable corporate lawyer specializing in intellectual property rights and executive employment contracts under Delaware and Ohio state law. Victoria read the 5-page cease and desist letter from Rachel Adams, set it down on the glass table, and let out a brief, sharp laugh. This is pure theater, Derek, Victoria said, leaning back in her chair. They are attempting to bluster their way out of an embarrassing technical failure. You bought an expired public domain for $12. You signed no non-compete agreement when you resigned because Julian removed that clause 3 years ago to avoid paying your executive retention bonus. What is our response? Derek asked quietly. Victoria pulled out a crisp sheet of letterhead. Our response is surgical. We cite Title 17 U.S.C. Section 106 regarding copyright ownership of your underlying proprietary code frameworks. We inform them that while the domain was purchased lawfully as abandoned property, any attempt by OmniKinetics to access the software APIs hosted on your private cloud servers without an active service contract constitutes unauthorized access. She looked at Derek with a sharp, approving smile. In short, we tell them that if they wish to route their client traffic through your domain, they are welcome to execute a formal technical maintenance contract with Vance Core Systems LLC at a rate of $75,000 per month. While the legal correspondence was being exchanged, a far more decisive event was unfolding in the financial sector. At 3:30 that afternoon, Derek's mobile phone rang. The caller identification displayed the name Edward Thorne, senior managing partner at Thorne Capital Partners, the lead venture capital firm that held 40% of OmniKinetics' voting board seats and had bankrolled their series of funding round. Derek, Edward Thorne said, his tone voice deep and direct. I am sitting in my office looking at a blank web screen. I have tried calling Julian 3 times and his secretary told me he was in emergency legal huddles. What is happening to our infrastructure? Derek did not raise his voice. He did not slander Julian. He spoke with the calm, methodical precision of a master engineer explaining a structural diagnostic. Edward, Derek said comfortably, Julian chose to restructure technical leadership last month. During that process, domain maintenance was assigned to an outside marketing agency. The primary domain registration lapsed on Tuesday night due to unpaid renewal fees. Seeing that enterprise continuity was at risk, I acquired the domain upon its public release through Vance Core Systems LLC. A long silence stretched over the phone line. Derek could hear the faint sound of Edward Thorne tapping his fountain pen against his desk. So, Edward Thorne said finally, The entire digital pipeline of OmniKinetics was left sitting on the sidewalk because Julian forgot to pay a $12 renewal fee? That is correct, Edward, Derek replied softly. And who currently maintains the underlying server routing algorithms? Edward asked. I do, Derek said, under my new legal entity. Edward Thorne let out a quiet, dry breath. I see. I am canceling our Series B funding review meeting with Julian tomorrow morning. Derek, are you available for dinner at 7 o'clock tonight at the Metropolitan Club? I would be delighted, Edward, Derek said. When Derek hung up the phone, he looked out Victoria's office window at the city skyline. The legal threats from Julian were nothing more than dry leaves blowing in the wind. Real power in the corporate world did not belong to the loudest voice in the boardroom. It belonged to the person who held the architecture together. By Wednesday morning, Julian Croft's world was unraveling with terrifying speed. In a desperate bid to regain narrative control, Julian announced an emergency company-wide rebrand. He called a sudden press conference at 11 o'clock to introduce Kinetics Nova, a name he claimed represented a fierce, celestial leap into the future of corporate logistics. He paid an outside branding agency $25,000 overnight to rush out a new neon blue logo featuring a stylized geometric spiral. He ordered the internal engineering staff to deploy a temporary website on a secondary .io domain name that Gavin had managed to register at 4 o'clock in the morning. The execution was a complete disaster because the new .io domain lacked historical domain authority and security trust certificates. Major corporate firewalls across North America flagged the new Kinetics Nova portal as a suspicious phishing site. When procurement officers at major shipping clients attempted to access their daily manifests, their IT security systems blocked the connection entirely. Furthermore, the new sales brochures that Julian had rushed into production contained glaring errors. In his haste, Julian had instructed his assistants to copy old product descriptions, which inadvertently included references to legacy software modules that Derek Vance had proprietary copyright claims over under federal law. By Wednesday afternoon, the internal morale at Kinetics Nova had completely collapsed. Two senior back-end developers, realizing that the company's primary infrastructure was anchored to nothing, handed in their written resignations and walked out the door. The customer service floor was chaotic, with representatives fielding calls from furious clients who were threatening breach of contract lawsuits under their service-level agreements. At 4 o'clock, the final blow landed. Edward Thorne issued a formal letter on behalf of Thorne Capital Partners, citing gross administrative failure to maintain core intellectual property assets, and breach of fiduciary responsibility under Delaware corporate law. Thorne Capital officially froze its multi-million-dollar credit line and demanded an immediate restructuring of the board of directors. Without venture capital backing and with enterprise client payments stalled, Julian sat alone in his corner office at 7 o'clock that evening. The room was dark save for the harsh glow of his laptop screen. Surrounding his desk were crumpled logo printouts, half-empty energy drink cans, and a stack of formal cancellation notices from their 3 largest corporate accounts. His phone buzzed on the desk. It was an email notification. Julian opened it desperately, hoping it was a message from an investor. It was an automated notification from his legal counsel, Rachel Adams, informing him that she was withdrawing as corporate representation due to unpaid retainer fees and unheeded legal advice. Julian's hands trembled as he opened a new message window. He typed in Derek Vance's private email address subject, Urgent Executive Consultation Derek. To Julian wrote, his tone stripped of all former arrogance. We have had our differences regarding strategic direction, but we built this enterprise together. I am prepared to offer you the position of Chief Executive Officer and Chairman of the Board with a full 30% equity restoration if you return tomorrow and integrate the domain back into our operational structure. Please call me tonight 2 miles away in a brightly lit top-floor office suite in downtown Cleveland. Derek Vance sat at a broad oak desk overlooking the glowing city lights. The office bore no flashy neon logos, no abstract motivational paintings, and no loud corporate slogans. On the wall hung a simple framed certificate of organization for Vance Core Systems, LLC. Sitting across from Derek were three executive directors from the nation's premier cold storage logistics network. They had spent the afternoon reviewing Derek's newly deployed enterprise infrastructure framework, a platform that was cleaner, faster, and 30% more efficient than the legacy system he had left behind at OmniKinetics. "The architecture is flawless, Derek," the lead director said, signing the final page of a 3-year enterprise service agreement. "We are transferring our entire fleet management routing to Vance Core Systems starting Monday. Thank you, gentlemen," Derek said calmly, shaking their hands warmly as they stood up to leave. "You will have zero downtime." When the clients departed, Derek sat alone in the quiet office. His laptop chimed softly with an incoming email notification. He clicked on his inbox and saw the message from Julian Croft. Urgent executive consultation. Derek did not open the email. He did not read Julian's desperate offer of equity. He did not feel a rush of anger or a surge of gloating triumph. He simply selected the message, clicked the delete button, and emptied his digital trash bin. He leaned back in his comfortable leather chair. On the right corner of his desk sat a small, custom-engraved walnut desk plaque that Nate Miller had gifted him that morning. Inscribed upon the wood in crisp gold lettering were 4 simple words: $12 well spent. Derek rested his hand on the smooth, polished wood for a moment, feeling the quiet weight of true technical mastery. He had not burned the old kingdom down with fiery speeches or dramatic battles. He had simply stepped aside, purchased the abandoned gate key for the price of a light lunch, and let incompetence crumble under its own weight. He closed his laptop, turned off his desk lamp, and walked out into the calm October night, fully in control of his future.